Hi, welcome to Punchline Talks, the business breakfast briefers budget special, sponsored by Hazlewoods Accountants and Business Advisors. I'm Mark Owen, editor and owner of PunchlineGloucester.com, and today my special guests are Councillor Lisa Spivey, she's the leader of Gloucestershire County Council; Richard Graham, former MP of Gloucester City; Neill Ricketts, entrepreneur, if I can say it right, entrepreneur and businessman; Glenn Collingbourne, tax advisor for Hazlewoods; Ian Mean, former newspaper editor of the Citizen, Echo and Western Daily Mail. Welcome all. Welcome to Punchline Talks today. Okay, we just had the budget. Councillor Rachel Reeves has revealed her hand. So I thought we'd start with you today, Richard, as you've been there in the chamber over a number of years. I think it was 12 budgets you probably saw. What's
14.
it like to be there during this, during a budget?
Well, I think any budget is big. This one was bigger than usual, partly because it was delayed. We're almost in December, and partly because there was so much speculation, arguably briefings and rebriefings prompted in the run up to it. So there was a big impact on markets, on investment, and I think in many ways the sort of final bit of it, which was the Office of Budget Responsibility leaking the whole thing 40 minutes before the Chancellor got up to speak, would have been very frustrating for her, irritating for the Speaker, and just gave a sort of final element of slight farce to what has been a very prolonged and agonizing pre-budget run-up. So I think the atmosphere inside the House, from what I saw, seeing a bit of it on YouTube, I think the atmosphere was even more excitable than usual. It is a drama moment, but it's serious stuff because what's announced, what's decided has, in some cases, an almost immediate impact on individual lives, on family situations, on business decisions, market movements. It's a big moment. And I think when you come into a budget, having said last year, that's it, we're not going to raise taxes anymore. It's on us now. We're going to get the growth to sort out our problems of debt, and £1 in 10 that all of us spend going on the interest of our debts. We're going to sort it out, the Chancellor said. And of course, the truth is she came back for not just a little bit more porridge, but 26 more billion of taxes. So that's 66 billion more in last year's budget and yesterday's. So a really, really difficult environment, I think, in which to make the case that all these things are necessary and good. And she made perhaps the best case she could. But I think we have to be realistic and say that the starting point for this is that they did have a plan to break the manifesto promise by raising income tax, then taking the same amount, 2%, off national insurance, meaning that pensioners and others would be paying more. But she could make the case that the average worker was actually net net equal. But they decided for political reasons not to do that. And therefore, what we've got instead is really a mixture of different taxes to try and make the figures work. And of course, the biggest one of all is what's known as the fiscal drag. So basically, keeping the tax allowances at the rates they were, which means that more people will be paying more tax. And that actually hits the very average sort of worker on around 40,000, a manager, but someone who might be aspiring to work harder and get promotion and earn more, they will be paying quite a lot more tax. And I'm not sure that many people in our county will thank the government for that.
Okay, no, well, thank you ever so much for that. I'm sure we'll come back to the sort of political side and your thoughts on how Rachel and Kemi did. I'm going to go over to Lisa now. Lisa, obviously leader of Gloucestershire County Council. There didn't seem to be very much in there for you guys.
Not at all, Mark. I have to say that it was for local government a very disappointing budget altogether. There's no new funding for local government, and I think where we see good things happening, the increase in the minimum wage, where I think it's really important that we really recognise that people need to earn more money in a cost of living crisis. But for us at the County Council, where we employ 4,500 people directly and pay over 50,000 people every month, we do have those on minimum wage, especially those in the care sector. No new funding in order to cover that. One of the other sort of big ticket items in local government is the SEND, so Special Education Needs and Disabilities Grant, which we get. That means that as a council, we are carrying a lot of debt because government doesn't pay us enough money to cover that. The Chancellor said that from 28-29, the government will take that burden on. Brilliant, really great news. But for our council, for Gloucester County Council, by 2028, that's £200 million. And there's been nothing said about what is going to happen to that. And, you know, across the sector, that is an enormous burden. And I think the calculations by the County Council Network say that there are at least a third of councils would then look essentially at issuing Section 114 notices saying that they're bankrupt if we have to pay back all of that money. A couple of other big losses really for Gloucestershire in particular. Because we're not yet in a mayoral combined authority, where there is that potential, it was raised that you could have a visitor levy. Clearly, Cotswolds, Forest of Dean, massive places with a visitor economy. Gloucester City Centre, Cheltenham, with all of its fantastic festivals, etc. We would love to be being able to do that. That's not certain yet whether we will be able to do that. And that would be a big loss for Gloucestershire. And the other one was that whilst there was 902 million put into mayoral city regions over 4 years, those were concentrated in the North and the Midlands. It feels really like the government has forgotten that the Southwest exists.
Okay, very good roundup. Thank you ever so much for that, Lisa. Really appreciate that overview. I'm sure we'll come back to that later on as well. Okay, let's bring you in, Glenn, because obviously the minimum wage, you've been a tax expert. Okay, what was your take on it then, please? Let's get to some of the nitty gritty, if that's okay with you, but some of the numbers.
Yeah, sure. Richard gave me a brilliant segue then, actually. It's almost like we've done this before. He sort of finished off then talking about fiscal drag, and that was actually kind of what I was going to try and put some numbers to. So what one thing I was particularly thinking about would be, so because personal allowance and because the basic rate band and the higher rate band, when they kick in, have been frozen in place, how does that reflect on people's earnings if they just receive pay rises, which is exactly what Richard was talking about. And obviously you can manipulate numbers however you want, but if we assume somebody was earning, let's say £50,000 per year, nice salary, but they on that sort of salary, they won't pay tax at the higher rate. If they got a pay rise in line with inflation, or maybe a little bit higher, perhaps it's just catching up from where there's been a drag in previous years, effectively, because the bandwidths, as it were, aren't moving with the inflation to their wages. Bearing in mind they've got no more buying power, or they because it's obviously just going in line with the economy. They would actually be roughly paying, playing around with the numbers a bit, as if they're earning paying tax of about 1% more. So it is in actual tax payment terms as if there's been an increase of 1% to the tax rates. So actually, those people are being affected, and absolutely, as Richard said, take that a bit further, and if they're actually trying to push their career onwards and step more heavily into those higher rate bands, they really will notice that they're not getting as much bang for their buck as they did previously. So talking maybe towards the people who are just starting out in their careers, there was some significant increases to national living wage, national minimum wage, and wages for people under 18, workers under 18. Well, obviously on the plus side, obviously socially, it's nice to know that those people can earn a bit more, and those amounts were double figure percentage increases. And so I've worked out, if I was going to be fairly precise about it, national living wage, including employers' NI, bearing in mind that's 15% now, is now just under £25,000 for a full-time worker. National minimum wage, that's your 18 to 21-year-olds, that's about 21,400. And for an under 18-year-old, that's 15,600, or call it 15,800 with the national insurance. And the interesting point about that is while probably not many 17-year-olds do work full time, let's just take that as an example. If you had somebody who's been working in the coffee shop full time, earning 15,600, and they turn 18, the extra cost to the employer will be about £5,600 as a result because of the
Wow.
step up in wages and the increase in employers' national insurance. That's about 1,500 cups of coffee we worked out to cover that increase in pay. But bearing in mind, of course, in real life, 1,500, it's not all profit. I did a quick little bit of research beforehand. A small business, a small coffee shop probably only makes 10 to 15% profit on its cups of coffee. So actually, it's going to be more like 15,000 cups of coffee in a year to be able to cover that wage rise. And then if I've quickly got enough time, I just wanted to cover off capital allowances. So this is something for business. You might be aware that if you've got a business, you buy quantity of machinery, you're allowed to write it off against tax over a period of time. But they brought in a couple of changes to that. The negative change they brought in, the bad thing, is the rate at which you receive relief from that capital allowance has fallen from 18% to 14%. If I just translate that into real life, what that probably means is if you own a company, it's going to be as if you're paying tax about 1% higher. If you're a sole trader or a partnership, and you're a very successful partnership, so you're up there, you're probably it's as if you're paying tax of about 2% more. So as a result of those changes, you do pay more. There were some reliefs that came in which sound good, but if you look at the costings, the government's expecting to be about £1 billion a year better off as a result of that capital allowance change.
Wow. Thanks so much for giving that really great insight there. Okay, that brings us to you, Neil. You're an entrepreneur, you're a businessman, you employ people. What's your take on it?
Well, I think it was tough, and I think it is. No matter who's in charge, it's going to be tough. The costs are increasing, running the country. There are less people paying, so I haven't fundamentally got a problem with tax, and I sure haven't got a problem with people earning more money. Against that, we have a backdrop of a really, really tough time for businesses, especially hospitality, that are seeing sales fall. We've got a cost of living problem. So I've got a couple of questions for the panel actually that we can debate later. But what's the point in working? We're seeing this money has been described not as pro-growth, which is I'm highly supportive of pro growth. Let's get successful businesses. Let's get those businesses then paying into the communities. That's the way, in my view, commerce should work. But I got to be honest, even myself, what's the point in earning? What's the point in working? We're seeing a far bigger welfare state now. And as a father of 8 children and one stepson, I'm pretty much a multimillionaire on the back of the 2-child cap disappearing. But anyway, that's a separate story. I mean, this was a very hard budget for businesses. There's no doubt about that. It might look good. There's some little bits of frosting on the top of a quite sour cake, in my opinion. EIS limits have been raised, which means you can drag in 10 million as opposed to 5 million investment. The number of companies I know that have dragged in 5 million of investment, let alone 10 million, are very, very small. I was one of them, but that's the exception to the rule. So the impact on the companies is hard. There's a little bit of frosting as far as I'm concerned. What's the point in my employees earning more money? My job as a CEO or an entrepreneur or a leader is to find the right people, to incentivize them. I'm doing a tax calculation for someone who's right on that border of the tax thresholds. It's actually better for him not to take a pay rise because it affects his benefits, it affects his private health, it affects his company car. And actually, I just throw my hands in the air and go, how am I meant to incentivize these people to work hard? Productivity is still the biggest issue in this economy. So the biggest problem I've got is why bother staying here? There are far more attractive places to be an entrepreneur or to be a business leader than the UK at the moment. And Richard will know that I got to spend quite a bit of time with politicians over the last 10 or 15 years. And we've got to create an environment in which people can be successful because that's what generates the taxes. That's what generates the income for the country. I've yet to see an economy really kind of flourish under a taxation regime. And so why work? Why stay here? What's the point in working? Why bother saving? What, it's all the things that stop you, being that successful person. And I despair. There was
Okay.
no help for SMEs in that budget. There was lots of rhetoric around helping startups and scale-ups, but no detail.
No, okay, really good points there, Neil. Thanks ever so much. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those as well. Ian, I'm going to bring you in. Thanks ever so much for being so patient there. Look, you've been around newspapers all your life and the media. You're a bit of a media guru. You love it like I do. What was your take from the media point of view?
It is one of the biggest days in a national newspaper's life. I've been involved with those days at the Mirror, the Mail, and I want to start off with the Mail, which I'm holding up there. And the Mail is basically that this is the heart of a lot of the right-wing papers. This is their headline, with a smirk that says, "If you work hard and save prudently, I'm coming for you." Reeves launches spiteful raids on strivers to lavish billions on Benefit Street. Now, that's pretty tough stuff, but I think that's at the heart of this. And if you read inside the paper, Andrew Neill, who's the former editor of the Sunday Times, headline on that story also sums it up. He says, "This is a watershed moment in our economic history that will consign Britain to a lost decade." The Daily Mail devoted over 20 pages of the budget, plus an 8-page supplement, how to protect your money after the budget shambles. That's big. Then right wing also, The Sun. That's a good front page. Benefit Street. Strivers get hammered by £30 billion tax rises. Families will foot handouts billed for skivers. Then the Telegraph, or what they call, the Conservative Party calls the Tory graph, are red books full of broken promises. And on page 2, I was looking at a story there by their senior political commentator, Annabel Denham, which is going to take the budget forward. Undynamic duo have saved their bacon until May. And I think that's what you're going to find the Sunday papers looking at, that she survives for a little while, but come the May elections, no. And the Times, very simple, very simple. High welfare, high tax. And one of the best pieces I've read today is by Fraser Nelson, one of their leader writers. And it just going back to what Neil was saying, this isn't growth, it's weakening the foundation. Financial Times, Reeves' budget smashes tax record. Very simple, very stark. Looking at left-wing papers, the Mirror had to be doing something like that. Budget with a Labour heart. And then the Guardian. I'm asking everyone to make a contribution. And if you want to laugh, how the Rach stole Christmas in the Star. It's quite interesting. In a couple of the tabloids, Nigel Farage has bought 2 pages in a couple of them to actually say this is what reform would do. So we've got the best press in the world. Some people say, yes, it's too biased, but there's so many papers here and they are so good. You pay your money, you take your choice.
Okay, thanks ever so much for that, Ian. Really great oversight of that as well. Okay, let's start a sort of open debate, really. First of all, I'm going to go back to you, Richard, because I'd like to know what you thought of Rachel's performance, and then Kemi came back. Kemi Badenoch came back What do you think of that? And we'll open it up to the rest of the team then about that. And I'd like to go back to sort of tax, and I'd love to go back to you, Lisa. There's so many different areas about adult social care, the cost this is going to cost you, the cups of coffee, all this sort of stuff, where it all fits in together. Even the cost of the papers, everything. Richard, Rachel's performance, Chancellor.
So, I mean, Mark, look, I mean, I'm really a believer in substance over style, because I think you can have fantastic performers anywhere in life. And if they're on the stage, then they should be very well rewarded for that. In politics, it's got to be more about substance. I don't think this Chancellor was ever going to be a sort of incredible orator or deliver a speech full of remarkable jokes or anything like that. But in many ways, the role of Chancellor isn't really about that. And the serious ones, the ones who we look back and respect most, people like Nigel Lawson and so on, there was real substance and a drive and a vision behind it. But I think what we're seeing at the moment, and I got to be very careful not to sound like a sort of a loser who's going to be resentful of a new government trying its best. So we all want every government to succeed. Doesn't matter what flavour they are. It's good for the country if they do well. But I think what we're seeing at the moment, unfortunately, is that she is trying to appeal to two very different constituencies. One is the world of the markets, business, the language of the government's priority being growth, 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 the language of saying we will be the most business-friendly government ever, and trying to show to the markets and to businesses like many of you on this programme and your listeners in Punchline that she's on your side. This government is there, it's pro-business. And on the other hand, there's a different constituency, which are the Labour voters. And her assumption, I think, with this budget is that Labour voters will be cheered by some relatively small things that will look quite good. So obviously these increases in youth salaries, Lisa referred to those. If you're a young person working, that's going to sound fantastic. But the reality is different, and it's best summed up in something from a woman called Nicole Jones, who I don't know, from the vintage birdcage cakery at Charfield, which I've never been to. She has just decided to close it, laying off 25 members of staff, because hospitality, in her view, has been pushed to breaking point, heavy taxation, rising costs, particularly on the national minimum wage and national insurance. And she said, the costs are too high. This has broken my heart. And I think that is the reality. And I also think that the reality of having, I think it's 14,000 people with 6 children, I don't think Neill is one of them, on universal credit, who are going to get significantly more money as a result of moving the cap on 2-child benefit. I don't think that's what the country feels its priorities are now. I really don't. You've got to focus on employment, and that means incentives for businesses to take on more people. Roughly what we were doing in 2011 and 12 in the coalition government, huge incentives. You remember it so well. Ian was right behind it. Neill was involved. Glenn probably was too, getting more people into apprenticeships. I had 9 of them. I think I was the first or second MP to do this. I think one of them is working in the county council now. These are fantastic ways of giving young people opportunities. If you bump the salaries up too much, nobody is going to take you on because they can't afford it. So I'm really worried that the performance wasn't great, but what matters more is the substance. By the way, on performance, I mean, look, I'm a fan of Kemi's. I think she's a woman of substance. She's punchy and she says what she thinks. And I think on this one, she got it pretty well right.
Okay, thanks so much for that. I totally agree on that.
Ed Davies said you can't tax your way out, into growth. I mean, he's dead right on that point. So I think, there were some points scored, but it's just frustrating listening to all your panel. Where is the good news in this?
Well, let's go back. I'm going to go back to you, Neill, because I think you hit the nail on the head as well about why stay in this country, why start a business up, why take that. When we start a business, you roll that dice. You roll that dice on your family, your income, your health, your marriage, all these things. When a business fails, all these things can fall apart. People commit suicide. That's the truth of running a business. It is tough. It is tough, and the ramifications for getting it wrong, as you rightly said, Richard. And this is going to turn the screw finally for people who just cannot make it any longer, as you rightly alluded to about the birdcage. Neill, let's bring you back in
It's so sad to hear
some of the
about.
points you raised.
Yeah, I mean, it's so sad to hear about that business failing, but I'm seeing it more and more, and people are reaching out and they're saying, "What can I do? What can I do? I just don't have the energy anymore." The point that I wanted to raise, Richard raised it, nice segue into there. Business needs stability. It needs long-term strategies. Okay. If you look at the big booming economies, Singapore, where I was born, they have 20-year strategies. We fail to get strategies that last a few years. And I was there in that boom time, 2010, 2011, 2012, and it was rah, rah, rah for startups. And to be honest, we built successful businesses in that time. We paid our tax. We paid far more tax than was proportional to the low productivity workforce that we're looking at in the UK now. The people that can make the change are the millionaires, and there's 20,000 entrepreneurs and millionaires have been successful in the UK and fled the UK in the last year. 20,000. I mean, I don't know what the tax implications for that are, but it seems big to me. And
Neill, let's if you don't mind me stopping you there, I'm going to bring Glenn in, because I know, Glenn, you actually deal with lots of entrepreneurs who look at Portugal, but
Dubai.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that what is that you're seeing? You're seeing that continual flood as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, when I'm not talking about tax rates, a lot of what I do is actually advising people on UK tax residency. Sometimes it is incoming, so people moving to the UK. A lot of the time it's outgoing, and absolutely where you've got people perhaps who are at an age where their children are probably grown up, so they're not tied to the UK because of young children, and they're coming up to early retirement or looking at an exit, so they're selling their business. Then it's very attractive to move overseas because of different social reasons and climate and all that kind of thing, as well as the fact you can get yourself into quite a low tax rate, and consequently there's a good reason why that they can sell their business, make a lot of money under the current regime, probably not pay any tax, and then invest it overseas in a nice house and swimming pool and all those things, and maybe start a new business from that location if they've got an appetite for it. So yeah, absolutely, that is I do quite a lot of work in that space. So yeah, that's definitely something we're seeing, and even to the point where actually where they're relatively young children, actually people are starting to think, well, perhaps we could just make a go of it in country X, whichever that one is. And there are some quite actually, you hear about tax avoidance countries and all these kind of thing, but there are actually some quite, well organized and very safe countries that people can go to and pay much lower rates.
Okay, thanks so much, Glenn. I'm going to go back over to you, Lisa. My goodness, what you mentioned earlier about adult social care, which is not paid for. So, so if I got this right, what you said was that obviously they've raised the minimum wage. We should obviously hike up the amount of pay you've got to pay the adult social care, all the people that work within that area, which many of them on sort of hourly contracts, and there's no extra money.
No, and bear in mind as well that we have the national insurance contribution, employers' national insurance contribution as well. So it's kind of double whammy. And again, something that Liberal Democrats have been campaigning for a long time is a rise in the hourly rate for carers. Absolutely brilliant, but government again haven't given local government any extra money to fund that already. So they're constantly baking this into the system. We are waiting, for the Casey report, which should deliver in 2028. So again, it just feels like constantly in local government, we really are at the coalface of delivering really, really important services. So we're from zero, from birth to death, if you need care, your local authority is the one who is delivering that. Even if you are privately funding it, we're organizing it, we're sorting it out, we're making sure that there is enough, that there is enough resilience in the market in order to be able to deliver for that. So it's really, really important. And I feel sometimes that government just completely forgets that we are really at the absolute forefront. We are in the trenches of delivering care, and it seems to not be not to be recognised. So it makes it really, really challenging. And I think for us as well, there's often criticisms from our residents about why you're not filling the potholes in, why you're not doing more of that. And because so much of our budget is based on care. So this year we are setting a budget, £697.5 million, of which, 3/4 of that will go into care. So adults and children's care. And, there was some money mentioned about, funding into roads and highways, but it's 2 billion. It does not touch the sides of the underinvestment we've had in our roads and highways as a country for a very long time. So, these might seem like big figures, but they're just not enough.
Now you're capped as well. You're only allowed to raise council tax by 5%, isn't it? Which most of councils have now done.
Yeah, that's right. And the expectation for government, I think, is really important to point this out. So when government gives us our local government settlement, that funding, that grant, the expectation is that every local authority will increase their council tax by the maximum. And so if you don't, then you're kind of penalised for it, because government expects it to, where you can raise up to 2.99% on council tax, and then 2% for the care levy, so 4.99%.
So I would assume then that the only way that you could raise the money, because obviously, there's only so much money that you could raise it, that you have to cut somewhere else.
So we have to make cuts, so in services, and again, for many of us, much of what we deliver is our statutory services, so we're legally obliged to deliver them, or we have to increase fees and charges for the things that we do that we do have a level of discrepancy around. So things like parking, permits, we could charge more for people to go to leisure centres, that sort of thing. But ultimately, in all of this, I think comes back down to the people that are paying the taxes, the people that are paying the council tax. They are all still the same people. And to a couple of the other points, yes, businesses need stability, but they also need customers, let's face it. And in a cost of living crisis, I totally understand why hospitality is really struggling. It's really expensive to go out. And if you've got a budget like this one, which puts the tax burden on ordinary working people on every single level, then of course businesses are going to fail. Of course, how much does it cost for a cup of coffee? £3.50 or something? I mean, that is a lot of money. So people aren't going out. So unless this government is really going to take some big, bold steps and some really bold tax measures potentially, then nothing's going to change, because people can't afford to go out.
And there's only so much, let's be honest, when we go out, there's only so much you're going to pay for a cake and a coffee. You'll be there going, do you know what? Let's not, darling. I think we'll go home and have it there, or not bother. I'm going to bring you back in, because you're like me, and well, all of us here, very passionate about apprenticeships. You did your 100 apprenticeship campaign, which was famous and was replicated across the country. There seemed to be some good news. The under 25s up to the age of 25s, apprentices, the Grand Trees, you can all have an apprentice now, and the government will pay for it. What did you think of that?
It sounded like it, and when Labour came in, I was very impressed with their plans for business, and I think apprentices are the key. But the real cost, as you'll know, is not that easy at all. It's not easy to take on an apprentice, and it's also very expensive to take on an apprentice as well. And I think that our young people, apprentices, are actually a key to growth. We haven't really talked about growth much, but I thought this was the whole point of this budget. I saw nothing in it that really said to me, that's a great idea for growth. What I did see is two things, and this is a reality. One, appealing to Labour members of Parliament who are getting very uppity, and two, the markets. And I can tell you that, and what Lisa was saying, social care, social care has been kicked down the road, a can down the road for years and years. We've got to wake up to this. We see councils going bankrupt. Lisa has explained the enormous amount of money that it costs. I don't think people understand this, and we all need these services. But unless you get growth, nothing happens.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'm gonna. Who wants to sort of come in on that? Actually, on the sort of growth side of stuff, because you're right. It was supposed to be the very first budget, or when they came in, was they were going to raise the money by increasing business. Yes, now.
I mean, my view is that this will actually be disastrous for apprenticeships. I'm a strong supporter of apprenticeships. Fundamentally believe, like everyone else around the panel, that they have a great potential. I think the danger is when we say apprentice, people think it means cheap labour. For a company, it's a 3-year journey, at least 2 years, but possibly 3 years, to get an apprentice from a school leaver to actually generating enough revenue to pay back the costs. I fundamentally agree with people getting more money at that lower end. I think they're abused. I think that we should do more, but there has to be. We've taken away the flexibility of the company, and Safran can pay 100% increase in their apprentice. Right. But I can tell you that small businesses, they can't, so that apprentice just will not get taken on. It's a kind of one thing fits everybody. And unfortunately, not everybody's the same size and can wear that. And the big impact for me is, and the thing that will kill all of my employees is inflation. And when you're getting 5, 6, in this case, 100% increase in salaries, the impact, I don't pay that. I pass that on to all the customers, and I think export has a big part to play in this, and we need to set up to be far better at export. But the reality is that most of the products are sold in the UK. That cup of coffee that you're talking about for £3.50, I can remember when a cup of coffee was 50p. Admittedly, it was instant, but I was dreading that they were going to put a latte tax on, and I'd have to stop going to see my mate Jake Blodry down at Just Pressed, But I think, for apprentices, this could be really harmful.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you there. I think actually for young people, I think there's going to be mass youth unemployment here. And when you have, we said, a jump, as Glenn said, a jump from £15,000, £600 to nearly £21,000, a rise of £6,000. It's crazy. Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, well, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. And it started already. We can already see the unemployment figures rising quite sharply. They're not always easy to work out because those who go on to benefits and universal credit is not always correlated with unemployment. It's more complicated than it was to know precisely what the situation is. It'd be a great bit of work, actually, if the County Council's economic team, David Owen and his gang, could focus on that, Lisa, and try and work out what the situation in our county really is. I mean, I think what we want to try and avoid is all sounding like a bunch of sort of gloomsters. So, I've been looking around for some sort of nuggets of good news. And obviously, locally, the fact that the Wool's investment has now come through is very good news. It's been talked about and discussed for the last 2 or 3 years, got a bit lost in the business of Unilever trying to sort of untangle themselves into separate listed entities, but that's now going ahead, so it's good news. And by the way, the numbers of people working there, it's already at 500. I can remember when it was down to about 170 by the end of the recession in 2009, so it's a big increase. Nuclear, well, obviously this government's very committed to Sizewell. It's announced a commitment to Anglesey. All these things take a long time, but it's encouraging. We're waiting for an announcement on an SMR, small modular reactor, which will hopefully be down in South Gloucestershire, so close by.
No, that's been announced. That's not happening. It's gone to Wales.
Oh, is that the one that's gone to Anglesey?
Yes, the one that's gone to Wales. Yeah.
We should still be. We should still be.
We've still got the Barclay site. Lots of medical isotopes. There are really good things happening there.
We should still be optimistic. There will be other SMRs, and they're in a good position. But nonetheless, actually, it's not just hospitality. I mean, as everybody has said, I mean, care is a very difficult subject. It involves visas for foreigners, all sorts of things. But Lisa and the county council are in a good position to know how difficult that is going to be. And I think what we've heard from around the table is that there are going to be whole sectors who are going to be in a very difficult spot. What frustrated me, and it'd be interesting to get Glenn's take on this, Mark, I think would be the sense I get is, she got roughly 13 billion out of these sort of delayed tax increases on everybody. And then she was looking around for the other 13. And it's a sort of bundle of rather odd things. So, electric vehicles paying 3p a mile from 2028. I mean, that's not a strategic thing. That's let's find another billion under the sofa. Dividends, capital allowances have been touched on. All of these things, they just look like, we got to find another 500 million here, another billion there. And each one of them chips away at sort of investors, at businesses, at people who are earning money. And I think that's frustrating.
Yeah,
Okay, let's bring Glenn in first, and then Neil. Sorry.
yeah, no, actually, interesting that you raised that because while we were listening to the budget live, one of the things we were doing, and it ended, we were getting all the documents from the Treasury and all this kind of thing. At first, we couldn't make the numbers work because she was saying 26. It looked like they actually needed to find 30. And we, like you, we got to about 13 and we're struggling to find the rest of it. And you do have to go through you do have to go through lots of little bits and pieces to be able to pull the entire lot together. And so you're quite right. There's all these little bits and pieces. Look, 2% on savings, 2% on dividends, but not the very top rated dividends for some weird reason. 2% on rental income, because as we know, that government tends to not like investment in rental businesses. So actually, yes, trying to pull the entire lot together. And then we've got charging. The thing I mentioned earlier on the capital allowances, that if that income was right, it looked like, I mean, it was from the actual document, a billion a year. That's a massive number. And so consequently, yes, there is, and of course the fiscal drag, which is perhaps a little bit harder to quantify. That absolutely does make those bits and pieces hard to pull together. I mean, there's been some really interesting graphics around if you've got an appetite for it, some of which are released on the Treasury website. I've got one up on the screen there. It's quite hard work to follow, even if I was to attempt to share it with you. But these things do definitely show that tax rates are going to be particularly high for the top 10%, quite high for the top, the next 10% down, but even tax rates increasing for the very lowest earners. They tried to justify that part of this is because we're all going to benefit a lot more from public services of being better funded, and that's almost like on the top end of it. But yeah, absolutely agree. It was hard to work your way through to actually find how you get there. You can get there in the end, but it does take a bit of work.
Okay, thanks for that. Neil, let's bring you in. And we are kind of having a wrap up, and I want to give us a good 5 minutes to wrap this up. So,
Yeah.
Neil,
Very quickly, there's two things that I want to raise. The first thing especially on the EV tax, Richard, do you think by the time we get to 2028, given net zero and all the things that's happening in the current climate, that will actually even make it to legislation? Because they've got no way of actually being able to actually administer that system as it stands at the moment. And Rachel Reeves has fallen down on many interviews now when she's been asked the direct question, how are you going to do it? And I felt at the end I didn't believe the figures. I found it very, very hard to actually quantify. I thought that it was very much push it down the road till we're not here anymore, and we don't have to really, take responsibility for it. It looks good. It's packaged well for the media. I'm sick to death of all these leaks and advisors and the press. I mean, we knew what was happening in the budget weeks before it actually happened. The minimum wage change, the OBR leak, all of these things. That's not the way, in my opinion, that politics should operate. And I kind of got the feeling, going back to my point earlier about long-term strategies, that actually no one's really bought into it and doesn't really care. That was my overwhelming reality.
okay, I'm going to give you Lisa. your overwhelming reality of it. We try and find some positives. I love the positivity, by the way, Richard. I totally agree with all that other stuff you said, but it's very hard. It's very hard. And I've been talking to a lot of businesses over a long period of time when we were delivering the magazine. It was pretty gloomy out there. And yeah, there's no road. I'm very sorry. I'm trying to find the positive. We haven't even touched on defence. Defence spending supposed to go up by 5%. We could be in war with Russia. You know what they're saying. I mean, it's not good, is it? Lisa, sorry.
Right, stop dragging us back along negative pathways, Mark. Let's try and be positive.
Sorry.
So I do try to be positive. I think actually that one of the positives is actually the lifting of the two-child benefit cap. I think that where we're seeing larger families, we know that lots and lots of very clever people tell us all the time that the quickest way to get children out of poverty, and we've got huge amounts of that in the UK, is to lift the benefit cap. I would hope that everybody would spend that wisely on their kids. That's not the way our benefit system works. But I do think that is a positive thing if we want to actually shift the dial on child poverty. So I think that is a good thing. Clearly, as local authorities, we can also look at how we want to administer council tax relief schemes. And I know that certainly in Cotswold here, we offer a very generous one, so that, because I think that it does come down to that, is that ultimately all of these taxes, all of these burdens are being paid by ordinary residents, and whether that's through your work, through your council tax, through other things. So that tax burden does weigh heavily. I would like to think that is to the benefit of delivering better public services. It's certainly what we'll be trying to do at the county council, but it is really, really difficult to do everything all at once, all the time. So there's a lot of challenge there. Other positives is that we have wonderful communities who get really stuck in Gloucestershire. I think we've got really great potential actually, and I think that's been picked up well around that skills agenda. Richard was mentioning nuclear, whether that it's not happening at Oldbury, but Berkeley, the site there. We've got the Golden Valley development. We're really hoping that we can get that Junction 10 money out of Homes England to make sure that works. I think we've got fantastic opportunities around skills. Ian knows that. We sat at the Economic Growth Board. What we can do around agri-tech, our fantastic visitor economy, cyber, security, defence, I'm going to GCHQ. There's so much going on in Gloucestershire. So I actually think there is a lot worth fighting for here locally, and that we can continue to grow and do, I actually think, better in Gloucestershire than the national average, which we are already doing in a number of sectors. So lots of things to be positive about.
Okay, let's stay on the positive stuff. Ian, positive. Let's last round up for you. Positive piece. 1 minute, please.
I think that Lisa and Julian Took have added a real positivity to the whole outlook for business. I sense that the growth plan is very, very good. It needs delivering properly. So I'm very positive. But on the government side, this is the business briefers. They clearly need a proper plan, which they haven't got. Respect business. This is the way to grow. Okay,
thanks for that, Glenn. Last piece
of positive. I tend to, because the sort of career I have, I tend to focus on the micro rather than the macro, like some of you guys. So I'd say probably as an advisor, at least we've got some clarity about what we're looking at going forwards. You would think that some of these things are going to stay in place now for a reasonable amount of time, so we can help our clients project forward with their tax liabilities. There was something tidied up to do with the farmers, which will be helpful. It doesn't make the problem go away that they were objecting to, but it's helpful. So it was nice to know that came about. So for the positivity for me is it does seem like something has been put in place. There's a roadmap, at least as to what these changes are and when they're going to kick in. So at least we can help forecast for our business clients.
Okay, thanks very much. Unfortunately, that's really all we've got time for. I would just like to add that, obviously, sorry, go on, Richard.
I was just going to chip in a quick sort of last minute soundbite. I think there are going to be two consequences of this budget. The first one will be that we'll see a lot of consolidation in different business sectors. For example, my little family business has just sold a pub. We've sold to quite a big family brewer and pubs operator. They will do a very good job. They've got great economies of scale. And I think that's what we're going to see. The small people will get squeezed out. And the best hope for many of us is to find a bigger operator in that same sector who will be able to keep the jobs for the people there. The second consequence, I think, is going to be a political and macro one. This budget may have saved Rachel Reeves her job as Chancellor because I think the Labour MPs won't be feeling too bitter about it. Some of them may even be very enthusiastic about it because those hidden tax rises are going to come a little bit later in this Parliament. But the real question is, does it get us back on the track of growing this economy and being a country where things are happening, businesses are starting up, employment is increasing, profits are growing, and therefore there's more tax available for the services that people like Lisa are running? And I think the answer to that at the moment has to be no. But will that force greater change before too long into that really pro-growth environment? I think the answer longer term is going to be yes. How we get there, I don't know.
Okay, thanks so much. Unfortunately, that's really all we've got time for. I would just like to say, after not being funny, Gloucestershire, we've been through the flooding, we've been through COVID, we've been through everything. Businesses always seem to find a way, and I do have the belief in everybody. Okay, I just want to say fantastic. Thank you ever so much to my wonderful panel taking the time out this today. I'd like to thank you all for watching. I'd like to thank our fantastic sponsors, Hazlewoods Accountants and Business Advisors. If you like the show, please like, share and subscribe, and we'll be back again next week. But remember, in between then, it's all in the punchline. Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.